so you all know. So if you're just coming on, go ahead and mute yourself. Otherwise, there's a lot of background noise. And if you don't mute yourself, I'm going to mute you. So you'll have to unmute yourself if you want to talk. And so John, I'm showing that we have 18 people.
Okay.
All right. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started as other people are logging in. Just a few announcements before I introduce our guest speaker for the day. So, hold on. Okay. So first of all, I think we have a few new folks on, and we want to welcome them. I think, well, I know Heather is on. Any other new coordinators on that we'd like to welcome? And Heather, do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Hubbard. I am in Colorado as the new Project WILD coordinator. So I'm really excited to join this team.
Yeah, we're really excited to have Heather on board. And she's been in her position at Colorado for just a couple of weeks. And we just gave her access to the coordinator corner. So she's really doing a lot of catch up. We've introduced her to the listserv, the famous Project WILD coordinator listserv. So, please welcome Heather and be sure to pass along any helpful information to her. And we're very excited to have her on board.
And it looks like Rachel is on as well in Indiana. Hi, Rachel.
Rachel, do you want to unmute yourself and say hello?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Woodworth, and I'm coming to you from Indiana in the Indianapolis region with the Division of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm really excited to get started with Project WILD. I've been in my role for about 4 weeks now, so I'm starting to get the hang of everything that's going on. But yeah.
That's great. Welcome, Rachel. I think 2019 is going to be such a great year. We have quite a few new people coming on and talking with a couple of other states to bring them back to Project WILD. So we're really, really excited about all the new people joining us. Kelly, anyone else you see that might be new?
I think that's it.
Okay.
We're glad the rest of you are here too. We love you as well.
We are. Okay. Before we get into things, I just want to remind you our next meeting is December 13th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Rennie McKay is going to talk about a campaign out of the Education Outreach and Diversity Committee called Making It Last. So if you want to invite any of your communications folks to join us for that particular webinar, feel free to do so. I think it might be beneficial to them as well. And then Kelly, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk about the conference.
Yeah, just to let you guys know, very soon, probably tomorrow, I'm going to send out an email to everybody with the first kind of round of conference information. So I'm starting to put it up on our website so that it'll all be in one place for you. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, this is pretty amazing. We have most of the 2019 annual meeting, Project WILD annual meeting planned already, which I don't know, that's just my retentive part shining through. But we are I think we have an excellent agenda. We have a great planning team, and we are getting started on 2020 planning and even 2021 planning. And so we may be contacting one of you, hint, hint, looking at the East Coast somewhere for our 2021 annual meeting. So we're trying to let people know a couple of years out when the conference will be and where it will be. And Tanya said North Carolina is still up for 2021. So yeah, Tanya, we will certainly be giving you a call. Yeah, so we're trying to get to plan several years out so people can know where they're going to be and start planning for funding and things like that. Anything else you want to add there, Kelly?
That's it.
Okay. Mark, do you have anything you want to add in terms of updates or?
No, I'm good, but thank you.
Okay, super. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Jonathan Singer. John is a associate professor and the department chair at the University of Maryland Baltimore County at the School of Education. I've known John for, I can't believe it's been over 20 years, but he did his postdoc at the University of Michigan when I was getting my master's degree, and that's where we met. And I really have the utmost respect for John and the work that he does. He is an excellent teacher educator. He's great at research and he's great at curriculum design and instruction. And I turn to John for many, many things professionally. So I have his bio there, and you can certainly Google him and find out more about some of the great work that he's done. But John, with that, I would like to welcome you to the Project Wild monthly-ish webinar series. And thank you for the time and expertise that you're helping to bring to us all.
No problem. Hopefully everybody will enjoy it and find the information we talk about useful. I do have a PowerPoint, which I can send to Elena that you can then hopefully then send out to everybody else. I can't hear a word you're saying. You're muted.
So you can also share your screen.
Okay.
I can stop sharing mine and you can share yours.
At the bottom icon that says share?
Yes.
Okay, share desktop 2.
And just so you all know, one of John's specialties is educational technology, so we expect great things from the technology here.
Are people seeing that? It's a very basic PowerPoint. Yes? No? Not seeing it.
I'm not seeing it.
We can see your screen with the sand dune and the Zoom window.
How if I put it back?
There we go.
Here it is. Okay.
I work off 2 monitors. What I will do is I'll make sure if people want a copy of this, just for whatever notes, toward the end there, I do have my email, actually I guess at the beginning, I have my email address if people want to get a hold of me. And at the end, there are some, what I kind of see is some of the big players in professional development, if people want to get, do some more readings or get some ideas. So as Elena was saying, we met back at University of Michigan, where she was a grad student getting her master's, I believe. And we both worked with developing curriculum and working with teachers in Detroit. And I think the very first module we developed together was how do I measure the quality of air in my city or something along those lines?
Yeah.
Quality module. Yeah. And actually for that module, I think I actually had Elena go to parking garages and actually collect exhaust from parked cars.
From buses.
Yeah.
That might explain some brain cell loss.
Yeah, to catch black lung later. More recently, I've been doing a lot of work in professional development, in particularly with a strategy called controlled practice teaching, which in the nutshell is about actually using the appropriate age students in the actual PD. So if you're running like an all-day PD, you actually would bring, for middle school teachers, you would actually bring middle school students in with that and actually do the lesson with the teachers and the students, and then reflect on that. So that's where I am with kind of my philosophy of professional development. I really think about trying to make the PD experience the closer you can mirror the classroom and the actual experience the teachers have back in their kind of real world setting, the better the PD will be going. So that's kind of my general model. What I hope to do today is I know Elena sent out some questions, which I believe should be appearing on your screen. So my general plan is those are the 5 questions that I know she sent out, is I'm going to go over what I see as best practice, or actually what the science education community sees as best practice for professional development, and then kind of give my take on those. And then if everything goes well, connect back to these 5 questions. I do want people to know that I am very informal. If at any point in time, anybody has a question, I really hope to make this more of a conversation than me just being a talking head. I usually don't do that very frequently. So that's where we are. Any questions before I kind of start moving through the next slide?
John, also, we'll be monitoring the chat box.
Okay.
And so if people don't feel like piping up or unmuting or interrupting, they can feel free to type a question or comment in the chat box, and we'll keep track of those.
Okay, I'll also try to periodically take a pause and a breath and go from there. Okay, so jumping right into kind of with the literature. So the research on professional development has more or less kind of coalesced onto what I'll call 5 big themes for what they consider best practice. And you can find these in pretty much any research that's done on professional development. These are kind of the 5 things that the general body of educational researchers agree on. Now, the one big, huge caveat to this is that research around professional development has a couple of big flaws. One is that it tends to be done only with volunteer participants. So most of the PD research is not on large samples where a district is mandating people go to. They tend to be more on small groups in which people are volunteering to be there. So you kind of get a skewed sample of the teachers you're working with. So I know one of the questions dealt with, how do you keep people motivated who may not be really motivated to be at this event to begin with? So that's going to be kind of difficult. I can give you my thoughts, but that's going to be kind of a tricky one to kind of really get at because that research really isn't out there. The other flaw, and this is actually getting better, and this also addresses the question about how best to evaluate the impact, is a lot of professional development research is based on survey information from teachers who attended the PD, whereas in my mind, in my research, and what I think you're seeing more being done is how are the teachers actually using that information from their PD experiences back in their classroom? So really thinking through what can you collect from the teachers or from the students that teachers are working with that really captures how well or to what level they're taking that information or those lessons or those strategies and actually using them in their classroom with their students. So those are 2 big caveats. So when we talk about best practices in professional development, a lot of it is there's caveats, okay? There's some constraints on the samples that people are working with. So with that being said, kind of the 5 big things everybody kind of agrees upon is PD that focuses on content, both disciplinary knowledge, as well as knowledge of how students learn that information tends to be very successful. The second big thing is active learning, which means you're actually having your participants actively engage in the lesson. And that could be anything from, which is what I tend, which I'm sure a lot of you may do, is actually have the teachers run through a lesson or several lessons as if they were the students and you're modeling the instruction for them, and they're kind of doing the whole thing. Is that a safe assumption? A lot of people do that kind of thing? Yay, nay? Show of hands.
Yes, I think that's pretty common for most folks. Yeah.
Okay. So that's one way to kind of think about the engagement. Other ways to keep people engaged is getting them involved in the conversation or the feedback discussions. So not just having the teachers do the lessons, but also having that discussion where you take a step back after the lesson is done and having a critical talk with the teachers where they're thinking through, okay, I've done this in the past. This is where I know my students have difficulty. How can we brainstorm as a group to come up with potential solutions to that? That mental engagement is also a way of having people being active. There are models that involve having PD that focuses on student work, whether it's samples of graphs or conclusions students are making, or even, which I've had a lot of success with, is actually using video of teachers enacting new strategies or lessons, and then using small clips to have the larger group talk about things they're seeing, and really kind of doing a deep dive and a professional critique about things that are working really well, and questioning the teacher about how they might have made a different selection or a different choice in a strategy next time around. So all those kind of things keep your learners engaged and actively learning. So that's a second main point. The idea of coherence is trying to do things that are consistent with your beliefs and knowledge of the population you're working with. It could also be being consistent with state or district or school, certainly standards or new reforms that they're trying to build upon. If you can build on those kind of things, your participants will see things as more valuable. So for example, in some of my work a couple of years ago in Baltimore County, we were working with the teachers to integrate, the larger idea of the grant was to integrate engineering practices into biology classrooms. Engineering is a new component of national standards. And a lot of science teachers don't have experiences with that. And so we were looking at how could you potentially integrate engineering. At that same time, the district was really interested in practices that help promote equity. And so what we were doing as we were planning our PD is we were thinking about how do we not only get across the engineering piece, but also taking a step back and thinking through, okay, how can we bring to some of the forefront some of the pedagogical strategies we're using that promote equity in the classroom. So we were trying to frame things in some of the larger reform efforts that the district also wanted to be, that they were investing in. Duration. I know on that slide, I have that little squiggly 20 hours. There is no magic number other than this idea that things should be sustained. Any kind of one-shot workshop really doesn't tend to stick. So there is this kind of soft number of providing people at least 20 hours is where you start seeing some differences in major shifts of instructional strategies. And the more you can do things over time and spreading things out is also very important. And then finally, this fifth kind of point that people kind of agree upon is trying to establish a community. In most of my work that I've done, we've always tried to, if at all possible, have multiple teachers from the same school there, or same grade level. Somebody, a buddy, a friend, somebody who your teachers, if they're going to try something new, they feel comfortable with either popping in the classroom and asking questions to, or just having somebody who just can give a shoulder or listen to them if things didn't go as well as they would have expected. So this idea of having multiple people there so nobody's kind of a lone wolf. There's a sense of community for mutual support. Any questions before I move on? I'm going to go, so the next set of slides is kind of going in deeper and kind of teasing apart each one of those 5 things and kind of trying to get into some specific strategies that I think I found effective. And if people also want to chime in about things they've done about some of these things, please do. Or if you want me to go in a different direction, just let me know. So are we good so far?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So John's take on content. In a lot of the work I've done, this goes all the way back to the work that Elaine and I were doing in Detroit. So this is over 20 years. We would spend all this time developing really what we would think really great, engaging, outstanding activities and lessons. And what we would find was that our teachers would basically skip all that and head straight to the worksheet. And what I have found over time is that teachers, particularly in PD, tend to focus in on the activity itself. They're very concerned about things like, can I get all these steps done? Do I have enough time to get things prepped? And they get so focused on the physical act of actually doing the activity that they lose the forest for the trees. They forget that the reason you're doing this activity to begin with is to help the students understand and learn about some sort of larger practice or concept. And so you need to really think about, when you're planning PD activities, is not just focusing in on the activity itself, but also providing time and really focusing in on how do we help students make meaning from this activity. So really focusing in on, okay, we've now done, I'm just going to take oh dear because I recently did that with my pre-service teachers. Not just focusing on the oh dear activity itself, but also helping and focusing in on, now what do we do with this data we've collected? What kind of discussions do we need to have with the students? What are the key ideas we want to bring out? What are the standards we're actually addressing with it? So you really want to think about the things that wrap around that core activity, meaning the meaning making. It's really important that teachers understand, and you need to highlight that you're doing this for a larger educational purpose. Something else to think about, this is also most on the front end as well, and this will also bring in engagement of your teachers and practices or experiences they may have that you want to draw upon, is many times some of the content and the practices that you're trying to get across with these activities, you may know offhand that what students may struggle with in trying to understand it. So really trying to have this discussion about, we know when students are trying to learn, let's say, I'm a genetics guy, so let's say they're talking about adaptations. You know, it's a random thing. It's not, there's a misconception that, you know, somehow these organisms are making adaptations willingly. So there's misconceptions out there that the literature has identified. Teachers may know from their practical knowledge of what their students have struggled with in the past, and then thinking through how we as a group might be able to tweak these lessons to help accommodate and really highlight and address some of those known issues students and teachers may have. There's this idea that is fairly prominent now, and actually does go back to some of the work that Elaine and I actually really did in Michigan, is this idea of educative curriculum. So one of the things that I do still, and a lot of people do this in the literature now when they're developing curriculum, is identify places in the curriculum or the lesson plan that you know students or teachers might struggle with, and provide them supports, like in the margins. So for example, if you know there's known misconceptions about a certain concept, write a margin note. We know that students struggle with this, so here are some things you might want to think about. If we know that teachers tend to make inquiry activities over-structured, so students kind of lose their sense of choice, you can put a margin note saying, you might want to try giving the students some, 2 or 3 different variables they might want to test. So it's this idea of kind of putting hints along the sides at the point in the lesson that makes sense for the teacher to be thinking about some additional supports. So this idea of maybe doing some educative cheat sheets to help the teachers think through and actually enact the lessons. Okay, so that's kind of my take on content focus. The last thing about content focus or content is I've worked with a wide range of teachers, both high school teachers, middle school teachers, elementary teachers, and sometimes they don't have that prerequisite background knowledge to really, feel comfortable in holding a discussion to help students bring out meaning, as well as not having enough confidence in their own background knowledge to allow an activity to be more open-ended, so therefore they kind of keep things tightly structured. So you may need to come up with ways that try to get out and get at what the teachers know about a particular concept or content. And this can be tricky because no teacher will admit they don't know something, and it's very hard, at least in my experience, to get teachers to admit or say something that isn't quite correct. And so you have to find a way to massage some of that. Any questions so far?
John, this is Elena. I have a quick comment. Sticking with the oh dear example, Mark and Kelly and I have been working with conservation leaders for tomorrow on that particular activity. And one of their biggest comments was that there's this huge misconception that the biggest population control of white-tailed deer is wolves or coyotes, when that's not true. That they're the biggest population control on white-tailed deer is human beings. So when doing that activity, we often introduce a quote-unquote predator, mm-hmm. and we make that predator be a coyote or a wolf or something like that, and it tends to reinforce this misconception that there are these natural population controls on a species like white-tailed deer.
So I guess there's a couple thoughts on that. One would be, I'm assuming prior to human encroachment on those habitats, at one point in time, there were natural predators. Correct? Yes?
Yes.
So, you could talk about kind of having that post-discussion about, now that these areas are built, in my own neighborhood, right, we have deer going all over the roads and through backyards, and clearly there's no natural predators. So having that discussion that brings that to the forefront is important. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to even alter the activity to use hunters as opposed to the natural predators?
Yes, we do, and some people do introduce hunters. But I think what's not emphasized is the fact that humans are the biggest population control measure for white-tailed deer populations. And Mark and Kelly and I are working on changing that activity for a future reprint to reflect that very misconception.
Right. So actually, if putting some sort of note that basically highlights known misconception or this is an issue we know teachers have been struggling with, and just kind of put a big banner that draws their attention to that, and that would then help the teachers understand that. And then you need to reinforce. You would need to reinforce that when you are leading professional development in that same activity.
Exactly.
Right.
I have Mark here, Mark Lefebvre. I have a comment too, and in this way to help tease out what educators know, assess what they know, or try to get them to talk more about the limits of their knowledge, and this idea of margin notes and kind of stepping back and debriefing during professional development. It all seems to parallel the need when educators are conducting the lesson with students, especially for models or simulations like ODEAR, to ask the question, how is this different than reality? And that would be a good opportunity, I think, to bring in that point, that margin note, not only during a professional development, but for the educator to then bring it in during conducting the activity with K through 12 audiences.
Totally agree. This idea that it's actually getting very NGSS-ish. If you bring this idea of these things being models or simulations, and those are all approximations, so they all have affordances and limitations, and having the class talk about, okay, well, how is this similar and different to what's found in the real world? It's great. That's awesome. Anything else? Okay, so moving on to John's take on active learning. So whenever I do professional development, and you do want to think about what I'll call a learner-centered manner. So the more you get the teachers involved, the more you once again, if you think about this idea of simulation, of trying to model the way the teachers would be using this activity with their own students in their own classrooms, and trying to, in doing that, I kind of use this 4-part model. Where if you see where it says activity, that's kind of highlighted in red, that's where everybody tends to gravitate toward. But even before a teacher does that main section of the activity, there is an intro part where where the teacher needs to provide some sort of context. Why are we doing this? And a lot of times that needs to be, maybe you're using a problem-based approach or project approach, or you want to try to ferret out prior knowledge of what students may know about this topic or this idea. So same thing when you're doing connected professional development, you need to think about how would a teacher introduce it. And then you have the actual activity. That's kind of the second step. And then make sure you're leaving time for meaning making. Okay, actually, how does a teacher think about what are the key questions they might want to ask their students? How do you get students thinking and sharing information in groups? How might you help develop argumentation so people can do some interpretation? All those kind of things. And then you want to think about, how do we step back and have a discussion regarding what were the pros and cons, strengths and potential challenges for doing this lesson. What I actually try to do also, and this sets up for future PD, is I also when I'm running PD and I'm running this as I would the lesson, I actually like the participants to critique me as the teacher. What instructional strategies did I use that they thought were particularly effective, and what did I do as the teacher that they thought they don't understand why I did it a certain way, or might there have been a different way to do it? And so what that starts doing is also modeling this idea of professional discussions, and you're putting yourself out there first and kind of showing that you're willing to take that step to be critiqued. But that idea of doing the activity and then taking a step back and really kind of taking more of that metacognitive approach of how is this going to work in my classroom? So that also maximizes what I'll say is classroom connections. And then I know actually in one of the other sets of questions that I got from Elena, there was something about doing multiple activities in a given PD session. So if you're doing a 6-hour PD, you're going to work through multiple lessons. Doing the same set of strategies all the time does get repetitive, even if you're having this, the teachers work as the students. So thinking about different strategies. So doing things where the teachers are acting as the students. One of the things that I really strongly believe in is trying to make connections back to the classroom. So if there's ways to bring in samples of student work, videos of you teaching to students, or if you have particularly really strong teachers who wouldn't mind that you can get into their classrooms and do some short video clip analysis, they wouldn't mind you sharing. Anything that could bring the classroom into the PD that can foster that discussion and provide examples, both positive examples as well as examples that foster discussion about how things might be done differently, can be highly effective. And all that is active, engaging, and not just engaging in the way of having the teachers actually do the activity, but engaging them. This whole idea of not just hands-on, but hands-on and minds-on, which is was the big, catchphrase, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. But this active learning of really having both the teachers engaged in the activity itself, but also in the more high cognitive activities of really thinking through and being critiquing and reflective and communicating and sharing with the other people in the PD.
And John, this is Elena, if I could interrupt again. Everyone, if you remember several months ago, Mark had asked for video of folks doing Project Wild activities, and this was exactly the reason why. Although we would love to watch those videos of you teaching on a Saturday night, because we got nothing else to do, one of the main reasons we wanted to do that is so we could start to build a central repository of enactment of Project Wild activities so that you could use during your professional development. And you can access that and use it just in the manner that John was talking about. So we will still take videos, so would love to have them. If you can get in the classroom or get videos of teachers in the classroom, please let us know.
Other questions, thoughts? So as far as video samples and samples of work, I've worked with summer schools, I've worked with summer camps. There's a whole host of different places you can go to try to collect some of these artifacts, and then using them in an educational environment. Okay. John's take on coherence. The big thing is trying to know your audience. So trying to collect some sort of pre-professional development information, whether it's sending out questions ahead of time of simple things like, what are you hoping to get out of this? What are your concerns? What do you hope to do better? Anything that can help you, understand a little bit better of where your teachers are coming from. Number one thing, if you want teachers to be using the materials in their actual classrooms, there's not a school district that I'm aware of that isn't highly aligned to either some sort of state or district set of standards in which teachers have to use pacing guides and have to address certain ideas. So really highlighting how doing these things are going to allow them to address those ideas is highly important. And I think finally on the back end, helping the teachers think about and giving them time to think about how these activities might be customized, their own localized environments. You may have teachers who have a high number of English language learners in the classroom. And so what kind of adaptations might they think through to pull some of these out? Some people, something as simple as 15 minutes versus 90-minute periods. But providing teachers some time to think through how they might be able to customize, and then actually leaving time in the PD to help teachers share some of those. That's kind of a short one. Thoughts?
I don't see any questions in the chat yet.
So, John, how do you typically collect that information pre-PD? Would it be over email or like a Facebook group, or what's an example?
Okay, so most of the work I've done tends to be more around like summer, like 2-week summer institute kind of stuff. And so for that, we typically do an application, and we have, those kind of questions on that survey. We have sent, something as simple as what Elena did for this PD, which was basically, Elena and I met, was it Monday? And then we talked about sending some questions out to everybody and just getting a sense of what people thought they wanted to focus in on. So certainly sending emails out. I assume when people are, most of it is, people are signing up for your professional development. So whatever process they're using, they're assuming they're sending some sort of application or RSVP in. Mm-hmm. So tied to that, maybe some sort of set of questions you might want to think about, just to get at least let them realize that you're not going to be talking at them, but you're looking also to make it a shared experience.
Great, thanks.
Yep. Anything else? The providing time for reflecting and kind of this idea of localized adaptations or localized customizations, that was something that I found, particularly with my work in Baltimore County recently. And even though all our teachers were high school teachers in the same county, even within the county, you have some schools that are more, I would say, are more rural versus some that are more suburban and some that have a more urban feel. And so there were some kind of school-specific kind of things they wanted to work through. And so just providing them some time and then sharing to avoid what I'll call lethal mutations, because you can adapt something to such an extent that it loses kind of its initial design rationale. And so you do want to kind of balance that some. So that is a potential caveat. Okay. You good?
Well, actually, John, Heather had mentioned that when she's done professional development in the past, she found it beneficial for teachers to have time to share and receive feedback on the plans that they made, and get feedback from one another. Heather, if you could unmute yourself and talk to us a little bit about the time frame of that. So I'm assuming that wasn't in like a 2-hour workshop, because there's not enough time to plan and provide feedback in that short amount of time. How did you structure that?
I think every time it looked a little bit different. So I always did more of a kind of backwards planning approach to my professional developments with what's my time, what's my overall outcome for my teachers. The one thing that I found, and through a lot of the research that I've looked at with professional development and just my playing and trying stuff out, is that metacognitive component of our learning is extremely important for our teachers as well as our students. So always having some form of built-in reflection and feedback time. It may be the full lesson that they were planning if we had longer time periods that we were working together during our workshop. It could be around small pieces of their own learning or instructional strategies and pedagogy that they were going to be taking back and trying. But the more that I incorporated that kind of metacognitive process and that networking of allowing them to provide each other with feedback and to build off of each other's ideas, the more excited the teachers were as they left. But as I would reach back out and get some evaluations and feedback of transfer in the classroom, I saw higher levels of transfer because of that time to process and connect with each other.
Thanks.
Totally agree. I think in some ways you kind of previewed my current slide. Yes?
Yeah, so far everything I'm reading, I'm like, yeah, totally. I'm like geeking out over here completely.
So actually, to piggyback on that, one of the things I would add to that, I do think it's very important that you do some follow-up and you do try to keep it as centered in the classroom as possible. Totally agree about trying to have teachers share both lesson plans and samples of student work. One of the specifics that I found to be very effective is setting specific dates. So if you just say, in the future, send me something, that doesn't work as well as you say, let's agree upon a time to meet again, and let's, make sure we have mechanism for easy sharing and commenting. Because a lot of the teachers I work with are very much like me, that if they see a deadline approaching, then they'll actually do it. Whereas if it's kind of some theoretical later point in time, then it may or may not happen. But yeah, I think you've kind of covered my take on duration. You do want to try to spread things out, make connections back, really, really try to have that follow-up focusing on the classroom. That's where it's going to be most effective. And particularly if you have teachers sharing both student work. I love when teachers share video. What I found to be very effective, because it is a risk. The teachers are trusting you when they're, nobody really likes to be videoed and having put that out there for critique. The strategy I found to be effective was that I would ask a teacher first if they would agree to participate and be videotaped, and then allow me or my research team to go through the tape and kind of find small little, nothing more than a 2-minute segment. And then I would kind of then, crop that segment, and then I would go and, kind of critique it with my own mind and kind of write down some of the things that I thought were, how I wanted to use it. And then I would meet with the teacher ahead of time and preview it with them. So they would know exactly kind of the things I'd be saying, and they wouldn't be getting any surprises. And then once they signed off on all that, then I found that to be very effective for them to use that kind of video up and being shared and critiqued. And over time, as we were modeling that technique, it got easier and easier for teachers to be sharing and thinking through things. But I've done that kind of that sharing both with samples of student work, as well as video clips, critiqued lesson plans, any of those things that can, once again, tie the PD back to the classroom. That's where you're going to get things that are going to be worthwhile. You'll get more buy-in from the teachers, as well as, it helps, and this gets to the next slide, but it helps develop a larger community. And that's eventually what you want to get to. You want these teachers to be, a community. And, with the social media tools that are available now, ideally that can be self-sustaining. And then when people can start reaching out to each other, and that's what you want. That's ideal. That's great. Thoughts?
We're getting quite a few comments about how the follow-up is one of the most challenging aspects of people's jobs. For I think everyone that's on this webinar, Project Wild is not their only job. They've got several other programs going on. Some of them are probably even writing state wildlife management plans in addition to doing outreach and education. So, you know, John, is there like one thing you think people could do? Was it like a follow-up survey 3 months later, or, you know, any kind of recommendations in that regard?
What I have found most effective, and so a lot of my work deals with again, summer workshops, is I want the teachers to try to enact something sooner than later. Mm-hmm. In my mind, 3 months is too late. Okay. What you want to do is, I think you want to, you know, get a sense of what's reasonable for the teachers. And so sometimes this depends on trying to align the content of the PD with what is coming up in the teacher's pacing guide in the next 6 weeks or something. And then do that. I would do that follow-up somewhere more into that 4-week time period, 3-4 week. Mm-hmm. Maybe push it out to 6 weeks. That's where you're going to have more, you know, I think you're going to get bigger bang for your buck.
Okay.
And if they have success with that first one, then having them try, you know, then try doing that again. But that's what I would think. I mean, a lot of times teachers are going to be very excited when they leave your PD. Right. And you build on that excitement. If you let too much of a gap go, that dissipates, and they get, you know, caught up in all the, like all of us do, right? We get caught up on the various day-to-day things that we have to deal with.
Right.
And, you know, whether it's, you know, chaperoning the school dance, or, you know, getting grades in. And so you want to try to capitalize that and do something, kind of strike while the iron's hot. So on the front end, if you can align as you select which activities to do, to think about, can that align with what the teachers will be covering in their curriculum, you know, 4 weeks out, 6 weeks out. Then that gives you an opportunity to really do a follow-up that's meaningful. And then once that's success, it's easier to do the next one.
There is a question about blogs or listservs. Do you find those helpful?
I have not used a lot of blogs.
Okay.
This also gets into my age, I think, as I'm getting older.
No, you're not. Trust me. You and I were saying.
You know, doing things online. You know, I have done some blog stuff. I mean, if there's an easy way for people to upload and share, that's great. You know, asynchronous things can work. Technology is getting better. It depends on the tools you have, I guess. I mean, I don't know what has worked better than others. I mean, in the research that I've done is we've tried to schedule after-school meetings, which people can Skype in, and we've tried to make it as easy as possible for the teachers. Now, you're doing something statewide, that's not going to work. You probably want to schedule something, hopefully video-based. But you want something that's going to allow teachers to view something, critique it, and be able to get comments out there. You know, live would be, you know, live is better than asynchronous, but, you know, you work with what you have.
Yeah, you know, it's been my experience that creating a website where teachers can upload materials or adaptations that they've made to activities, you know, when you have 20, 30 teachers in a cohort, it doesn't get used very often, or one or two people upload something and you have this vastly empty collaborative website. So for the coordinators out there, you know, I would challenge you to think about how, you know, the national office can help you in that regard. What if the national office had a portal where teachers could upload things or share modifications to activities or have a chat room? Would that be helpful for you? You know, and that way, if we have a national database, you know, if we get 10 people from each state participating in something, that's 500 bits of information, you know, on that particular portal, which might be more useful than a local or state level. You know, I'm not sure, but, you know, so I would challenge you to think about how we can continue to help support the work that you do in that kind of regard.
If I may also jump in there, and I think as coordinators try out these different techniques that online technology or internet technology has to offer, it's really helpful for us to hear about it. You know, for example, Tanya had posted in the text about their homework option for a more extended experience. So there's a 6-hour training plus 4 additional homework hours where they can conduct more lessons. And that's compatible with this idea of a more sustained training, but it builds upon the existing model of the 6-hour training as an option. And in a similar way, there may be many options, like, you know, as Jen mentions with Padlet, maybe you could try Padlet prior to your wild workshops and have, you know, educators communicate, but and then let us know how it worked, and maybe, you know, maybe that would help us build momentum for these kind of tools provided from the national office. That's all for me.
This is Kelly. I was thinking along the same lines as what you mentioned, Elena, about a portal, and that just reminded me that as we're talking with Project What, we can also you know, ask them about what their experience has been with their portal now that it's been online for a few years, and see if they've got a lot of use about that and what kind of feedback they've received.
Those are all great ideas. With the issue of, you know, if you're running a PD with, you know, how do you get things started? If you think about, you know, this idea of, you know, collaborative learning and small group learning, perhaps a model where you had, I don't know, 4, 6, 8 teachers agree that they're going to share among themselves. So you kind of build these little cells, and then the cells then report out some other way to a larger group. Maybe that might work. Because I do think it's easier to build, I think, you know, small little, you know, call them cells, I guess, and then build from there and have connected cells. Maybe that might work. I haven't actually tried that, but theoretically it sounds good. Thoughts?
Mark here. So I had a bit of an experience with that recently with an NSTA sponsored course in which we had somewhat like breakout groups for discussion and introducing ourselves and asking questions, and that I thought was very helpful. It was also interesting in a recent webinar that we hosted at Alpha. Elena had us breaking out into groups, and I think that there's a lot of potential there. We're pretty excited about it. So I could see that being like an online component, you know, perhaps prior to a face-to-face training, the way you have jigsaw groups in a face-to-face training, maybe we could try that prior to the face-to-face portion.
Yeah, especially if you're doing multiple lessons, in a longer workshop, and then you have teachers, group up and agree which lesson they want to try to do and report back on. So you'd have natural groups forming around, common interests, and then feed off that.
So this is Elena. I just want to interrupt for a minute and say that it is 3:30 and I want to be respectful of people's time. So if you need to log off and check back in later, please do. Again, this will be recorded and I'll send you a link to the recording, but this is a really good discussion. So if you can stay, I would encourage you to stay.
I'll try to wrap up shortly or soon. So kind of looping back to those original 5 questions, the question regarding the train the trainer, how to keep facilitators engaged, post-training. I don't do a whole lot of train the trainer stuff, so I don't really have a lot of experience. What I do have is how to maximize, trying to have teachers actually enact the things that they did during the PD. And so that's mostly, this idea of duration and targeted follow-up. Really trying to think through and being strategic about can you actually plan the PD and hit the ideas that hopefully will be coming up, just about a month away. So it's far enough off that the teachers still have time to plan for it, but it's not so far off that they lose the excitement for from what they learned from the PD. So this idea of really targeting the follow-up, setting a date, and using that as a way to have the teachers actually try something and pull something off in their classroom. And same thing following up with buddies. This idea that if you have 2 or 3 people that you're kind of being mutually responsible for, it's kind of like what I'm doing now with my son. So we're both trying to get back in shape. My son's on campus. He goes here. And so now we make arrangements to meet at a certain time at the gym and we work out together. And if we can't, we post pictures of ourselves post-workout to kind of demonstrate that we're actually still doing things. So that idea, if you have 2 or 3 people that you're kind of being responsible for or responsible with, that might be a strategy that also might work. So those kind of relates to kind of those bigger ideas of best practice number 4 and best practice number 5 in my mind. Thoughts? People who've dealt with this more than I have?
Kelly's calling it accountability buddies.
Hey, good word. I like it. Okay, I'll practice my wait time and moving on. Looping back to, is it better organized training with both pre-service and current classroom teachers? There is no right or wrong answer. Personally, I really love doing pre-service, in-service teachers together. I think they both bring different strengths. Pre-service teachers in general, I find to be a little more fearless. Sometimes it's, ignorance is bliss, so they don't know any better. They should be really worried. And so they're more apt to actually try new things. That's actually my part of my philosophy for how student teaching should be occurring, is it should be an opportunity for pre-service teachers to actually try things in a relatively safe environment. It also allows for the mentor teacher or your in-service teachers to have more professional feel, that they're also there to maybe ground what that pre-service teacher wants to try, and bring their own craft knowledge in. So I do think it can be a real win-win situation with that kind of environment. I do think you need to be careful of, you know, I would say more on the in-service teacher than on the pre-service teacher, of just hanging back and observing more than participating. But I actually did do some research when I was on faculty at South Carolina. So now we're going back to the early 2000s, where I was looking at, could you flip that in-service, pre-service teacher role, and could the in-service teacher actually learn things from the pre-service teacher? And we implemented a unit on genetics out of the Concord Consortium, which, by the way, is probably the country's best open source educational technology group. And they had a dragon program called Biologica. And actually the in-service teachers learned from the pre-service teachers, and I went back a couple of years later, and they were actually still using what they learned from the pre-service teachers. So I really love kind of this model of doing pre-service and in-service together, if you can make that work. Anybody else's experience with that?
This is Heather. I know with some of my professional developments in the past, we started having more and more of our mentor teachers bringing their student teachers in. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that we started doing was we would create activities where we would mix the groups and split them, so they weren't only working at their table with their school in particular, but meeting with schools from other areas or teachers from other schools. Mm-hmm. And when we did that, we would purposely separate out our pre-service from our in-service teachers that were coupled. And what we saw was our pre-service teachers really would engage a lot in conversations in a very different way when they weren't with their mentor teacher. It broke that role a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then they were really sharing their ideas. So it was really kind of fun and neat to see how they would interact in a different way.
Would they then go back to their mentor, and would you kind of like on a jigsaw model where you have them separate and then go back and separate again, that kind of thing?
Yeah, totally. So then we would have separations. We'd mix them up to do some type of activity and explore, talk through their ideas and thought processes. And then when they come back to their tables, they would debrief on the work that they did in their small groups and share out some of the ideas that came through that work.
Have you had a chance to do any follow-up to see what actually was carried out in the classroom and how that went?
No, just like some of the comments, the follow-up, even in public education sector, has always been a difficult one. When teachers get back into the classroom, they tend to hit the ground running. And so it's been hard in that angle as well, of how to get the feedback or that follow-up going where it's relevant for the teachers and not additional work. I found when I had more relationships with the teachers in the schools, it was a lot easier to get the follow-up than ones where I didn't really have that relationship where I could get in easily. So that was kind of the next step that we were working on. We hadn't quite got there before I took this position.
Okay. Other thoughts? Okay, let's go to question 3. Should I require pre-post workshop assignments? My thoughts are definitely yes. On the pre side, as a way to kind of get to know your audience and potentially ferret out particular things of interest to them. And then on the back side, kind of giving an assignment of actually trying something out in their classroom and either collecting some sort of student evidence or artifact of how it went to then share and critique. That's a good way to actually, have the teachers use the stuff that they're doing in the PD. So to me, that's a definite yes. And I think we kind of hit both this idea already. Anything else people want to add on this from their own experiences? Okay. Evaluation techniques. And once again, to me, if you couldn't tell, I am a big believer that you really want to try to find things that originate and come from the classroom, because that's where the rubber's hitting the road. Surveys, post-workshop surveys are fine. In my own work, that's what the county used, and they had a stock set of questions, which they then used to compare to other PDs to see how things worked out with the teachers' thoughts. But for me, the thing I think you really want to try to find a way to strive for is what can you get back from the teacher that helps demonstrate what did they use in the classroom. And I suppose that could be a survey as well. If you can do a survey with the teachers after after a period of time that they've been in the classroom, what did they use from, how did they use the information or the lessons from the PD? What did they use? What did they not use? And at least that would give you a sense of what they took away from it. It's kind of a second-hand measure. We've used a lot of SurveyMonkey, so that makes it as easy as possible. Plus, it allows it's an easy way to kind of collate the data. But what I really like is finding a way to have teachers actually share some sort of artifact from their classroom, as to me kind of the gold standard of effectiveness. Thoughts? Okie dokie. Mixing online, inline. To me, once again, the key thing is about engaging your participants. In my mind, I think I lean toward starting with face-to-face, because I think that's the easier way to build trust. I think it gives you more opportunities to share and use a wider variety of strategies. But I do acknowledge that the social media tools are getting better and better, and I recognize I am getting older and I have my biases. Thoughts? Elena?
Well, I'm right behind there in age, so I'm catching up, I feel like. But I really like a blended learning model. And one of the reasons I like that is because, especially having people get together in the beginning,
right,
it helps really build this collaborative effort, and having that face-to-face connection. Really, I think what I've seen in my experience is that it helps with communicating better online.
Right, I would agree.
And encouraging discussions back and forth.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. Okay. Oops, let's skip that slide. And then my last slide is basically the people who I highly respect in the field. Big fan of Hilda Borco. She's out of Stanford. Kate McNeil is also a Michigan grad. Kate has done a lot with argumentation. So this idea of helping the students have these really rich discussions that are evidence-based and based in the activities. That's kind of the meaning-making piece. I think, did we overlap with Kate by 1 year, Elena? No. And then the other big name in the field, Susan Locks-Horsley, big name. William Panul. So I can, once again, I will send my PowerPoint slides to Elena, and then hopefully Elena can then, if people want it, go ahead and send it out. And I'm more than happy to talk to people. So that's what I got. Any final thoughts, questions? Anybody left out there?
Yeah, we still have 17 people online, so. A few did have to bug out, but they did express their gratitude and that they feel like they learned a lot and took a lot of notes. You know, even one person said they're going to share this webinar with some of their staff and other facilitators. So I think this is great. We really do appreciate your time and your expertise in sharing that with us, John.
No problem. Anytime. Anything else from anybody?
Thank you.
John, this is Drew. I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, Elena, I will talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Elena, you still there?
I'm still here. Yep.
Want to call you so we can do a quick debrief?
Sure. Hold on one second. Let me stop recording there.
Is everybody off?